I worked at Record World from 81 to 82. And then in mid or spring 82, then they went out of business and I started at Billboard. And I was at Billboard by 80, let's say by March or April 82. And I was there until 89. So I've already been covering the Michael Jackson thing pretty, intensively. I remember seeing the previous Jackson's tour, played the Garden, I think in 80 or 81. And the reason so I was around that thing. I also had met I'd met Quincy by then. I interviewed Quincy Jones extensively, did a couple of big interviews with him. So I was sort of like covering it on the ground as it was starting to happen, from Off the Wall through the Jackson's album through. And you could see something was happening but who knew it was going to be that big. And then I got a phone call at Billboard, which is, we're looking for an author to do this book. It needs to be delivered. But it was like, I'm going to say this was the spring, and it had to be done in like 4 months or something. It was a pretty, in order to get it out for January 84. And so, like, as you said, these kind of books had become a staple. I think that Dave Marsh's Springsteen book, Born to Run, was a big bang. It did really well and made the Times bestseller list. And now there's like a glut of these books. Good work for young writers, right? So I said, how much is it? They'll pay you $7,000. $7,000 in 1983, was it? Yeah, 1983 is a lot of money for a guy who's making $300 a week, at Billboard. So I said, sure. I wasn't sure if I could, I'd never done a book. I wasn't sure, but I knew that this is an opportunity I couldn't turn down. And I wasn't the first choice, by the way. There was someone else another writer already turned it down. So it was Dell Publishing. I think the editor's name was Gary Luke or Gary Luck. And I had to suddenly grind, hit the pavement. Luckily, I'd already interviewed a lot of those guys. So I'd interviewed Quincy, I'd interviewed Greg Fillinganes. I interviewed almost a lot of the musicians I already had interviewed. And then I lucked into a few people who knew Michael well, his family. I only spoke to Michael one time, and this is a funny story. I'd gone to LA and I was interviewing Joe Jackson, who, the patriarch of the family. At that point, he still managed Janet. I think LaToya was going to make a record. He still managed Michael along with a couple of other guys. And I'm talking to Joe, and Joe's a very boisterous, kind of braggadocio type of guy. A lot of people didn't like Joe. I found him amusing. He didn't, make me mad. Some people didn't like him, but I found him entertaining. And he puts Michael on the phone. I guess to prove I think at that point there were a lot of rumors about Michael and him having trouble, and that Michael wanting more control, which he eventually got. He puts me on the phone with Michael Jackson. So I talked with about 15 minutes with Michael, which is weird. And, and also there was definitely interesting power dynamic between Michael and his father. Why would you just do that? You're proving a point, But that was lucky for me. I got that. So all of these things started happening, and I was able to get the book done. Now, what's interesting about the manuscript itself is that literally to make the final deadline, I went on Saturday to Dell Publishing. It was me, a woman who was working as a publicist for me, and Gary, the editor. And I had to that was interesting. The book had a lot more rock critic stuff in it. It was more like a Village Voice article. And Gary and I were knocking heads over how literary critic, how critical is it, or how is it digging, And so he had me rewrite certain sections he thought was too complicated for the readership. And so literally, I was on a Saturday, and I spent like an entire Saturday in the offices. I was there early, and I remember leaving late, rewriting stuff to make the deadline for the book. So it was a grind. When I got the Michael Jackson gig, I really wanted to write about Motown. I was fascinated by Berry Gordy. I was fascinated by how that worked. how does this Black company out of Detroit become a global brand? How does this Black company out of Detroit create at least 4 or 5 huge enduring stars? I mean, Diana Ross, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Michael Jackson, these are still, they're still, they resonate in the culture still. So I was really fascinated by it. And so part of the Michael Jackson book is I already started interviewing people about Motown. So that actually ended up helping each other. But having the book, then it definitely helped me get the deal to do the Motown book. Absolutely. The two things are linked. But also, the Michael Jackson money allowed me to get my own apartment. So I had been living with Robert Ford in Queens, Rocky, up until, when did I move out? 85. And now I had the wherewithal, to get my own place. And I moved back to Brooklyn. I moved to Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And it was an area that had beautiful housing stock, but was considered crime ridden. So there was this incredible brownstone. I mean, like, that was empty. There were a lot of empty brownstones in the mid 80s in these parts of Brooklyn. So I was able to get a duplex with like a fireplace, wood floors, had a backyard. It was amazing. I mean, I couldn't believe it. But I only could afford it because of the Michael Jackson book. And so that gave me the wherewithal to do, I could stretch out. I had my own place. I was also able to then afford to hire, go do research, get researchers. I remember going to Detroit and spending maybe a couple of days in Detroit at the county records office and finding every lawsuit that had ever been on Motown, because I figured there's a lot of detail in it, and it was amazing. I found an amazing amount of detail about the company from the transcripts of the testimony for depositions. So yeah, the Michael Jackson book facilitated a change in my life that then allowed me to go ahead and have more wherewithal to be a better writer and do the research that I needed to do.